Now, we all remember Harwin Breakbone Strong, son and heir to Lord Lionel Strong of Harrenhall, older brother to Larys the Clubfoot, lover to Princess Rhaenyra, true father of her first three sons, Jacaerys, Lucerys, and Joffrey Velaryon, the man who was regarded as the strongest knight in the Seven Kingdoms at this time. And now, after a barbecue gone wrong, he watches over his family with his son Luke by his side. In canon, Harwin doesn't really play much of a role in House of the Dragon. I mean, he does, and arguably his actions with the princess have some of the biggest ramifications in the story. But despite being rather important to the story, being the reason Rhaenyra has bastards, which soils her image in the eyes of the people, and calls her claim to the throne into question besides her being a woman, Harwin isn't involved in the actual conflict, being the Dance of the Dragons. He has zero impact because he's dead, murdered alongside his father by his own brother, who he actually seemed to get along with, if I'm not mistaken. Harwin Strong, the future Lord of Harrenhall, is a song unsung. He didn't have the chance to rise to power, the chance to be there for his lover and his sons, to support them when they needed him the most. But what if that were different? What if instead of being flambéed, he was there to stay? Not just surviving, but maybe even thriving at Rhaenyra's side. What if instead of Rhaenyra Velaryon or Daemon Targaryen, Rhaenyra married Harwin Strong? How could the story change? We'll set the stage in Episode 3. In Episode 3, it's Aegon's name day, and Rhaenyra feels like an outsider in her own family. She feels alone, in that
no one's here for me,
and hates being used as a political tool. She runs off into the woods with Criston Cole, and while they're out there, she gets attacked by a boar that she slaughters. Later on, she returns to camp. Everyone looks bewildered and maybe even disgusted by the princess, but Harwin seems totally into it. This is the first time we see a hint towards a potential relationship between the two of them, but it mostly goes over people's heads, and I think it's more of an Easter egg for the book readers who know what's coming more than anything else. So when they get together in the future, you can't help but wonder why. One minute she's sleeping with Criston Cole, then the next she's with this random guy who saved her at the wedding. Granted, we do see a fair bit of Harwin from time to time, but even though there is a clear care for one another here, maybe even love, how he got with the princess is still a bit of a mystery. So in this what if, to make her choosing him as a consort make more sense, we'll actually start planting seeds of their relationship here after she kills the boar. After returning to camp, Rhaenyra sits alone with Criston standing by her side. Her hair and hands are a mess and bloody. She's lost in thought. No one wants to approach her. Or rather, they don't know how. It's unseemly for a lady, let alone the princess, to do something so brutish. As she sits alone, Harwin approaches her to make conversation, inquiring about the boar she killed. Rhaenyra says it wasn't planned, to which Harwin says that it clearly wasn't. He tells her that she practically butchered the thing, and begins giving her some pointers about how she could have made the kill quicker and less bloody. This is a small change, but it's pretty significant. It's an innocent conversation between two people with no ulterior motives, like what happened with Jason Lannister before. Harwin is genuinely interested in Rhaenyra and being friendly, and this means a lot to Rhaenyra, who's in a very strange situation with her family and feels kind of alone. She's glad to have someone truly interested in her as a person, not just some princess or heir to the throne. The two of them become fast friends, and Rhaenyra takes a liking to Harwin before they leave the hunt. This connection that they have only gets stronger over time. Since Harwin is the son of the Hand and commander of the City Watch, he's around a lot, so when Rhaenyra wants to talk, it wouldn't be strange for her to seek out Harwin Strong for a conversation, or advice if she so needs it, especially since Daemon isn't around yet and she's not talking to her family all that much. It's just a small change, but having them form a connection earlier on, besides a few brief contact scenes with no real substance, makes her choosing him later on a bit more reasonable. So, like in canon, Rhaenyra has her tour to determine a suitor, and potential consort that ends in disaster. Rhaenyra returns home, and so does Prince Daemon. Like in canon, the two sneak off into the city to have some fun. In the original timeline, they bump into Harwin Strong while they're out, and he lets them go. Now, because the princess and the commander are a bit closer in this timeline, I'd say this interaction goes on a bit longer, not by much, but he doesn't just let her go like he did in canon. In this timeline, he inquires about what she's doing outside the castle, saying that it's not safe for her to be out at night, to which Daemon replies that she's in safe hands. Harwin nods to the prince and then leaves. Things continue as normal for a bit. Rhaenyra and Daemon end up in a brothel, and then Daemon abandons Rhaenyra. In canon after this, Rhaenyra storms back to the palace, but this time we'll say instead of just going back home, she actually wanders around the city for a bit, before once again coming into contact with Harwin Strong. Harwin asks about what happened to the prince, to which she responds that he abandoned her. Harwin then takes it upon himself to see the princess back to the castle safely. As the commander escorts the princess, he asks her how she even got out of the castle in the first place. He doubts the Kingsguard would just let the heir out of the castle in the middle of the night with no protection, even if Daemon was the chaperone. Rhaenyra then responds by showing him the secret passage that she took to escape when they go back to her room, which surprises Harwin that something like this even exists. He remarks that it seems faulty and even dangerous in design. The idea that people could move about the castle, watching, waiting, and listening undetected. If the wrong people knew about this, who knows what could happen. Rhaenyra then jokingly asks if she should be worried about him telling anyone, to which Harwin says that information like this is bound to be worth its weight. It's only a joke between friends, of course, and Rhaenyra begins to make a show of not letting Harwin leave the room because he can't be trusted. So this whole scene kind of mirrors what happens between Rhaenyra and Criston Cole in canon when he wants to leave and then she keeps going after him. But this time around, Rhaenyra and Harwin do have to be quiet during this little game because Criston Cole is still outside, and he doesn't know they're there since they snuck in the same way Rhaenyra got out. But for the most part, things go about the same. During this little bit, Rhaenyra, who has been left wanting by Daemon, kisses Harwin and tries to seduce him like she did with Criston Cole in canon. Harwin has proven himself to be a bit of a hothead before, like when he attacks Criston Cole for making an implication that could be easily disregarded or spun around in his favor. So I'd suppose it's not hard to believe that he'd fall for Rhaenyra's charm, especially since he already did in canon. So this time around, Rhaenyra sleeps with Harwin instead of Criston. And from there, things go somewhat the same as they did in canon. Harwin will of course leave as to not get caught. Daemon is confronted by Viserys and exiled. Alicent finds out about what happened from Otto telling Viserys. Alicent talks to Rhaenyra about it, who lies about what happened and is then given tea later on by her father. Alicent speaks with Larys about what happened that night, but here's where things take a bit of a change. When Alicent talks to Cole about what happened and tries to figure out what's going on, since he's not the perpetrator this time around, he has nothing to confess to. So in this moment, Criston Cole isn't so consumed with stress and worry that he outs himself and the princess to Alicent, so the queen remains in the dark for a while about what happened. The king, though, is a different story. Like in canon, after catching the wind of these transgressions between his daughter and brother, he tells Rhaenyra that she will marry Laenor Velaryon. Rhaenyra isn't thrilled about this, and she tells Harwin as much when she sees him again. It's after she tells him about her dissatisfaction that he offers to marry her instead. He considers it a matter of honor, kind of like Criston Cole did in canon. He defiled the princess and potentially soiled her reputation, and now because of his actions, she's being forced into a marriage that she never asked for. Harwin believes that he has to make it right. Perhaps owning up to his actions will restore her honor.
You have your honor, and I have mine.
Now, this match isn't a bad one. Harwin Strong is a very respectable man. He's commander of the City Watch, the man hailed as the strongest knight in the realm and the future lord of Harrenhall. And since he's not asking Rhaenyra to run away with him to another continent like Criston did, marriage to Harwin actually seems very feasible since he's based in Westeros, and marrying him won't cause Rhaenyra to give up her status. Not to mention, Rhaenyra actually cares about Harwin beyond being a hookup. So she actually entertains the idea, but the real egg to crack here is Viserys. He ended her courtship and seems pretty set on marrying Rhaenyra off to Velaryons, so he'll need some convincing. So we'll say Harwin gets his father to get him an audience with the king. He won't tell him why, just that it's a matter of honor. So we'll say that Lionel does this for his son, and once this happens, Harwin comes clean about everything. That Daemon did not sleep with the princess, but he did. Now, to right his wrongs, he wishes to marry the princess. This naturally infuriates the king, who says he should have Harwin gelded and sent to the wall. Lionel, who has managed to be present here since this is his son and heir, manages to get Viserys to abandon that line of thinking though. Viserys heeds him since this is his hand now and his good friend. Otto was still exiled in this timeline. It's a very long conversation, but without going into too much detail, we'll just say that Viserys agrees to the match to avoid any future problems. And just like that, Harwin Strong and Rhaenyra Targaryen are set to be married. Alicent, of course, is informed about this and the logistics of what happened between them that led them here. So, like in canon, she does have somewhat of a strained relationship with Rhaenyra for what she did, but it's not as bad since she actually married the guy she broke the rules with this time around. Either way, what changes could we see in this timeline? For starters, since Rhaenyra and Harwin are married, any child born from the union would not be considered a bastard. They would be legitimate Strongs. So, stuff like this...
Doesn't know, does he? Lord Strong.
Come. Let us drain our cups to these three strong boys.
would not be an insult, just a mere fact. no one will assume bastardy for these children. The origin of her children is easily explained. Even if all her children were born with dark hair, people will only have to look at the father for any and all explanation. This means that even if Alicent holds a grudge against Rhaenyra for losing her virginity before marriage, rumors are going to be very hard to spread to taint her image. So Rhaenyra won't feel as pressured to leave King's Landing since those rumors aren't spreading around. She'll feel secure enough in her petition to stay, and the Greens won't have an easy time spreading their roots. Another change that comes around in this timeline due to my meddling is that Criston Cole most likely stays as Rhaenyra's sworn protector. In this timeline, he never broke his vow and never forsook his honor. Because of that, he never asked the princess to marry him and got turned down. And since Rhaenyra doesn't go around producing bastards, he has no other reason to be offended by her. Same goes for Alicent. While she may feel a way about Rhaenyra and Harwin sneaking around before, if 10 years goes by without incident, it's possible they just patch up their friendship sooner than they did in canon. Kind of the same thing that happened in my What If Laenor Was the True Father of the Strong Boys video. A part of the reason Alicent dislikes Rhaenyra is how brazen she is, spitting in the face of society and its law by producing obvious bastard children and showing how little regard she has for her duty and the realm in her eyes. Like in the Laenor What If, here there are no bastards, no reason to view Rhaenyra in a more negative light, since all her children are legitimate and she needs to be taking her position as heir more seriously. Another thing that would change in this timeline is the kids again. Rhaenyra still has 3 sons to start out with Harwin Strong, and they are genetically the same ones that we get in the show. But since Harwin is the official dad this time and not Laenor, he's actually going to be a bit more involved with their lives, especially when it comes to naming them. The naming process between Rhaenyra and Laenor will most likely be different between Rhaenyra and Harwin, especially since Jacaerys and Lucerys are actually Valyrian names, and these are strong boys now. Not to mention, baby Joffrey has no reason to be named Joffrey since Rhaenyra never married Laenor, and never slept with Criston Cole. There was never a grand wedding between the families of Velaryon and Targaryen, and Joffrey Lonmouth never made Criston Cole press X to murder. So in this What If, Jacaerys will be born as Balon Strong, Lucerys will be born as Aerion Strong, and baby Joffrey is born as Aerys Strong. Like in canon, Rhaenyra's oldest son is heir to the throne after her. But in this timeline, since she married Harwin, this means that her younger son, Aerion, is going to be in line to inherit Harrenhall instead of Driftmark, which is arguably a step down from canon because this means he won't be inheriting the Valyrian wealth or fleet. And speaking of the Valyrians, since Rhaenyra never married Laenor, they were never brought back into the fold through marriage, so the families are still at odds, even with Daemon marrying Laena later on. But for the most part, things are pretty peaceful in this timeline. The Strong Boys are respected because they were born in legal marriage. There are no rumors surrounding their birth. Because the kids aren't bastards, Rhaenyra's image isn't called into question. And because of that, she probably feels much more secure in her standing and may not feel as pressured to marry her son to Alicent's daughter. In canon, this offer was political. It wasn't just her extending an olive branch to her friend to make amends. She knew the walls were closing in on her and wanted some kind of security through a match between Jace and Helaena. Here, though, she doesn't need to marry Balon to Helaena. Sure, they could unite the families and their claims, but other than that, it offers no real political advantage, especially since the paternity of her kids isn't being called into question every 5 minutes. But even then, assuming she does marry Balon to Helaena, perhaps in an attempt to invalidate Aegon or something, or strengthen her son's claim in general. Assuming Otto does not come back and Alicent is the main head of Team Green, she may actually accept this though, since she's more sympathetic and forgiving than her father is, especially if Rhaenyra isn't in a situation where she's producing bastards left and right. Either way, things are shaping up to be rather peaceful. Aegon and Aemon most likely won't hate the Strong Boys because they aren't being told they're bastards. This means that when Laena dies, and assuming Aemon still claims Vhagar, he won't be calling them bastards during the fight if that breaks out, even if they bullied him like they did in canon. Honestly, since they aren't bastards, Aemon has no weak spot to poke at, and because of that, nothing will warrant Balon pulling a knife on Aemon. So I'd say that Aemon won't lose his eye, the fight gets broken up by the Kingsguard, and is ultimately just disregarded as a fight between kids. Fast forward 6 years though, assuming nothing happens to Harwin, he most likely ends up having 2 more kids with Rhaenyra. And these 2 that will be introduced are completely new characters to the story, taking the place of young Aegon and Viserys since Daemon is not their father. We'll say that instead of 2 boys, it's actually a boy and a girl this time around, Aemma and Aemon Strong. Assuming that nothing dramatic happens during this time that makes Alicent vengeful, or Lionel dying and Otto is brought back as Hand of the King, if everything is peaceful in the family, Rhaenyra may ascend to power without much resistance. Maybe there will be some resistance from other lords, but if the House of the Dragon stands together, I don't see much issue. And if they're worried about the Velaryons potentially posing a threat in the future, assuming that Helaena doesn't marry Aegon or Balon in this timeline, and if Laenor is still unwed, perhaps Viserys could make a match between the two of them before he dies and bring the families back together. But let's say that peace is not an option. Let's say that before the events of Driftmark, Lionel dies, whether it be by Larys' schemes or some freak accident, and Viserys makes Otto his hand again. With Otto coming back, Rhaenyra will not ascend to the throne peacefully even if her children aren't bastards and she's the image of duty and honor. Otto says it best himself.
Rhaenyra will be a good queen.
It wouldn't matter if she were Jaehaerys himself, born again. Rhaenyra is a woman.
Because she's a woman, she cannot be allowed to rule. So much like in canon, he will scheme to get Aegon on the throne, perhaps even pushing his daughter to marry Aegon and Helaena together so he looks more like a legitimate Targaryen ruler. He'll most likely still try to influence who sits on the small council as well, but assuming Rhaenyra and Harwin stay in King's Landing, he may have a pretty tough time doing that. That may change if they head for Dragonstone, though. And also, I forgot to mention, with Rhaenyra marrying Harwin, this also means that there will be no petition for Driftmark succession. Since Laenor doesn't marry Rhaenyra, he most likely doesn't need to fake his death, and even if he did, assuming he had no heirs of his own, it seems pretty clear that Vaemond would likely be the new heir to Driftmark should anything happen to Corlys. And while we're on the topic of the Velaryons, assuming the dance still happens in this timeline, the Velaryons may be pivotal. They're the only other dragon riding family out there, and depending on what manages happen here, they could be a very valuable asset to either side. All in all though, if Rhaenyra married Harwin, things could go well, or we could end up with the same mess we did before, just with a few changes here and there. Either way, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, let me know if you have ideas of your own, and I will see you all next time.